They just got here, yeah.
Good, good.
Thank you very much, by the way. I
Oh,
appreciate
Oh,
it.
yeah. You're welcome. I've got all these different addresses, devices, way too complicated.
Yeah, it's no worries.
All right, well, it's 7:01, so I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start with, let's see, one announcement. Unfortunately, Kim Grinnell has resigned from the Broadband Committee due to personal reasons. Hope maybe she can come back in the future, but for now, she's left our committee. And let's see. Becky will not be joining us tonight. So with that said, why don't we take a look at the minutes? Has everyone had a chance to review them?
Yes.
I move we approve them.
I second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, no discussion. Let's see. Let's start with George Cook. How do you vote?
Affirmatively.
Okay, Gina Sawyer.
Yes.
Okay, David Firkins.
Yes.
Mike Ray.
Yes.
Okay, Jonathan Janitis. Okay, Jordan Barnett Parker.
Abstain.
Okay, and I vote yes, so the motion passes. Let's see. Why don't we now, you know what, since you're here, David Kinney, do you want to quickly just tell the committee about your progress reaching out to the other service providers in the area? You're muted, so you know.
I certainly can if that's what you'd like. I will tell you that Roger's joined as an attendee too. So when you're ready for he and Paige, I can bring them over and make them live.
Great.
Yeah, let's see. Start with the not so good news. I didn't bring notes, of course. Red Zone and Consolidated Communications, I haven't heard anything from. US Cellular, I've spoken to a couple of different representatives. They are speaking now with engineering, and probably in the 10 days or 2 weeks, we'll have better knowledge of what they have for coverage, what they can offer. If they think they can offer something that's worthwhile, they'll let me know. I'll let Josh know so he can invite them to a meeting. If not, they'll let me know, and I'll let Josh know that they're really not all that interested, or don't have what they think is competitive to offer to the group. And that was US Cellular, and spoke with the folks from Charter Communications, and the right person hasn't been in the office and available to speak with, but they assured me their government service coordinator that the right person will be contacting me. They have somebody that's working with broadband committees in their service territory, so they're very familiar with what communities are looking at this point. So making slow progress on that end.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And so now why don't you bring over Roger?
Okay.
And let's make Paige live.
Good evening, everyone. This is Roger.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey,
Roger.
Roger.
Hey, Roger, thank you.
Great. So, Roger and Paige, do you want to just start by introducing yourself, your titles, and sort of your role in bringing broadband to Islesboro?
Well, I'm happy to start. This is Roger. The Islesboro Municipal Broadband Project started off in 2014 with a letter to the select board from a family who said that the internet access available at their home was inadequate for their needs to work from home, and that thus they were moving from the island. This caused great concern because there was anecdotal evidence of a difficulty with getting online and the quality of the service and support. The select board asked Paige and I to work together and come up with an assessment and a plan. And Paige and I worked hand in hand. In addition, we brought onto our team Vern Ziegler, who was our town assessor, and you may know him, and Arch Gillies, who was at the time the chair of the select board. And the four of us became the Broadband Working Committee from that point forward, roughly the beginning of 2015. Since then, Paige has taken on the role of what we refer to as the on-island contractor. And that means that he is the primary repair guy for the infrastructure and for customer support. I chair the Broadband Oversight Committee, which is a town committee to maintain the quality of subscriber services and to oversee the contracts that we have, the contracts and the financials of the operation of this. So that's right now our two roles. The system has been live for 2 years now. We have 632 subscribers, which is the great majority of Islesboro properties that have been improved, have the fiber optic connection to their homes. The actual internet connection is provided through a contract with GWI of Biddeford. The town owns the infrastructure and maintains the infrastructure in good working order. And then the town contracts with GWI to do the maintenance and connect the subscribers. Each subscriber then pays something in excess of the actual cost for a subscription or a connection to the subscriber's home. So the subscribers are bearing the cost of the internet access, and the town maintains the infrastructure, the dark infrastructure, in good working order.
Okay, great. Paige, do you want to tell us about your role? Oh, you've got to unmute.
Better?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Roger covered a lot of the bases. I've got my own business here on the island supporting technology, which I've been doing since around 2003. So early on was definitely seeing a lot of the pain of people trying to work. So at any rate, that technology role is something that I still do today, but I also wear the hat, as Roger said, of being the OIC, the on-island contractor, which GWI has me doing their installs and that type of work, the repairs and the first set of eyes on a problem if we need to bring in big guns from the mainland for bigger problems. So now, early on, as Roger said, I was pretty heavily involved with the whole process of getting this, get the town to buy into it, get the people to vote for it, and then get it actually built. And once it was built, then I stepped away from that. As Roger said, then he's really working more with the official side of running it, the IMB, the municipal broadband, whereas I'm working more as in that capacity, I'm working as a subcontractor with GWI to make sure this is running and the customers are all happy.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we open it up to questions from the committee? Does
Well,
anyone-
let me begin.
Yeah, sure.
First by thanking gentlemen. What was the situation prior to 2014 in terms of service on the island?
That's a really good question. And the first thing that Paige and I orchestrated was what we call a census of the island to see how people were able to connect to the internet and their level of satisfaction with that connection. Anecdotally, we knew that most people that were using the internet on the island were utilizing Fairpoint at the time, their DSL connection, which was somewhere between a megabit and a couple of megabits of download support. But we were surprised when we did the census that there were both underserved areas and unserved areas of the island where people, no matter how much money they wanted to throw at the problem, weren't able to get internet connections. There were people trying to utilize cell phone hotspots. There were people with radio links to the mainland. And it was the case that the large summer homes had thrown money at the problem and were mostly using radio links and or multiple DSL lines. And the net result was we discovered in 2015 that a real haves and have-not situation. And the other thing we knew is from our Paige's technology experience and mine, that we knew DSL as a technology would never be able to keep pace with the federal definition of what broadband meant. So that we concluded, given the situation, that something had to change if the town was going to solve the problem or orchestrate some sort of a solution. And let me stop there, but I'll say, and Paige and I are emphatic about this, that what we did on Islesboro was a good solution for Islesboro, but is not necessarily the solution that all towns should enter into, or any other town should enter into. What we've always said is it's important for the leadership of the town to make sure that there is good internet access, but that may certainly be from a incumbent communication supplier or a large telco or a cable company. But the towns need to show leadership in terms of making sure that this is something that's available and affordable in their town. And that's the way our select board really treated this proposal as it moved through, which is they had to be the leaders, they had to set the tone, but it was really ultimately up to the townspeople as to what to do and what options we had.
It's very helpful. Is there any possibility you could share the nature of the census, the questions you asked?
Oh, certainly. In fact, we have a shared Dropbox of material that when towns ask us for information, we can provide that. Everything we've done is all under the sunshine laws in Maine and is freely available. There's only one thing that's protected, and that is the actual names and costs in the GWI contract, but everything else is available to you. And if you'd like that information, we're happy to give it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I'd like to back up a little bit, clarify a little difference, I suppose, in some of what Roger expressed. Some of my view has been and is the type of approach we did here will work for a whole lot of towns in the state. And I think in many cases, this is probably the best solution they would be able to find in the state. But I 100% agree with what Roger said is we made sure that that was a decision that was made by the people on a long journey where we involved the community heavily. And you'll see that in the documents that Roger was just talking about that we can share. We had a lot of town meetings, a lot of discussions. We had analysis done with reports that showed, what the options were with whether it was DSL, fixed wireless, cellular, all the solutions that are in place now, and what it might cost, ballparking and looking at the options. And the people themselves on that journey, they got behind this as saying, hey, if we're gonna have the solution, we're gonna put it in and we're gonna own it. And again, my personal perspective is, I think the way it worked out here is really quite ideal, 100% ideal for us, and I think for a lot of the communities around Maine would be. But exactly what Roger said, you got to go through that journey and make the choice on the way. And some of that story is talking to the incumbents, which at the point we were going through that, I think their minds were very close to really being able to do a solution that would work for the communities. But I think now they're trying harder to really look at how they can get in the game and do something that's fair and reasonable. But again, that's what you've got to look at yourselves, is what's the right balance.
And was Fairpoint the major incumbent?
The only incumbent out here, which for us actually was a plus. I mean, if the cable company was here, it would have been a much harder journey to make, for a lot of political reasons and marketing reasons and things that go on. So for us, with just Fairpoint, and as Roger mentioned, where there were people who couldn't get DSL, some people had reasonable for that point in time DSL, and others had DSL that was dropping off. It was quite easy, and people who are already quite fed up with Fairpoint at that point, where they come out once a week, so service was slow, and if they were busy that day or a storm, then you didn't get service. So people were already a little tired of that. So that was in our favor with respect to trying to push forward to get a solution.
And we did an RFP where we asked for proposals about how to meet 3 goals. And the 3 goals were 100% coverage, that every property on island could have the service, that the service would match the federal definition of broadband now and forever, and that there would be an on-island service technician so that service and support could be done more timely. And we got, I'm going to say, a handful of responses. As Paige mentioned, the incumbent responses from the cable company and Fairpoint at the time didn't really treat our request as serious. And none of those proposals met the 3 goals. The proposal that was interesting to us came from GWI and Biddeford. And what they said was that we can operate and maintain such a network, but we don't have the financial assets to undertake the construction. And if the town would undertake the capital risk of construction, then we as GWI could be the operator. And that was the proposal we went to the town with. It changed quite a bit in terms of the details of the proposal, but ultimately that is the proposal where the town owns the infrastructure and GWI lights up the subscribers. We went through many different scenarios of how to run the business and what it would cost. But one of the things that we showed the townspeople in the process of voting for this is that the subscriber fee plus the small addition to the property tax for covering the construction and maintenance was still less for 83% of the property owners on Islesboro than what they were paying to Fairpoint at the time.
And that was for DSL.
Wow.
And that was for DSL.
Okay.
So the DSL,
Yeah. Should I? Oh, sorry.
DSL phone.
And we now know anecdotally that families have moved here to take advantage of the broadband so that they can work from home. We had a flurry of comments as the coronavirus crisis sent everybody home that honestly no one could be doing what they're doing or educating their kids had we not done this. And that was heartening for us. And so far, the first 2 years of operation have come in slightly under budget in terms of the costs. And the system has been much more reliable than I ever expected it to be. So we have not had a system failure, knock on wood, in 2 years. We have had individual subscribers. Fiber drops get damaged in storms, but the system has stayed up continuously since it was lit up more than 2 years ago now.
Great. Okay, David, you had a question?
Yeah, and it picks up on what you just were talking about, which was cost. So for us, we have about 3/4 of the town that has broadband, and we're trying to figure out how to get the rest on broadband. And we also suspect we have issues with people not subscribing because of costs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to figure out an equitable way to get everybody on and also to make it cheaper so that more people can afford it. So I'm very curious to hear more about your costs, because I've been assuming that a public system where we already have 3/4 of the town tied in, that a public system would probably be too expensive. But what you just said kind of contradicted my thought. So could you talk a little bit more about your bond, your impact on taxes? And you said 83% went down, but just talk a little bit more about how that cost worked. And for people that were having a hard time affording access, were they satisfied, and were they able to join in?
Okay, well, I'll start, and Paige should definitely chime in because he's been working on installs lately. One of the goals we set in the broadband committee, in the construction and working group, was that we were going to make sure that no school child, no home with a kid in school had to be out of this. There would be no haves and have-nots in our town if the town was the sponsor of doing this. And that meant that for us, everybody gets the same service. Everybody gets a gigabit symmetric fiber connection to the internet, every home, for $360 a year in subscriber fees. That was a very important principle for us. No haves and have-nots. We have, I believe, pretty much succeeded at that, although in the last 2 months, we were actually surprised to find a family that couldn't afford to be connected. And there are, like the Islesboro Community Fund has stepped up and helped people in terms of the installation cost. And we should talk about the installation cost, but help people get the install and help people afford the subscriber fee. Frankly, we're a little concerned, given the unemployment situation in Maine, about people's ability to pay right now. But generally, we don't hear anything that the system is too expensive. Indeed, it's very inexpensive. From a town standpoint, as I said, the town built and owns and maintains the infrastructure. The bond to build the system for the entire town was $3.8 million. That built 46 miles of fiber infrastructure. It built all the electronics huts, and it connected every property that signed up during construction to be connected. So we built in the connection to the property in the cost of the construction bond. And that was about a fifth of the cost of the construction was the cost of connecting the 600 plus homes and businesses into the system. So that last 100 feet cost about $800,000 of the cost. The rest was the infrastructure. Today, the town pays the construction bond, which was done at a very agreeable rate, and it pays for the maintenance and the upkeep of the fiber infrastructure. The biggest expense of that is insurance. We have to maintain a substantial liability policy by state statute for being on the poles. We have named storm insurance in the event that there was a hurricane and damaged the system and it needed to be brought back. So the biggest expense of the town, other than paying the bond back, is the insurance bill, which is upwards of $50,000 a year. But that's our choice. Other towns could choose to do it differently. The other expenses that the town taxpayers pay for is the pole attachment leases, a small amount for the actual maintenance. It doesn't amount to more than a few $1,000s, maybe $10,000 or $15,000 so far. So the actual cost to the town taxpayers in terms of the annual budget is just over $100,000. And again, the subscribers pay the month. We get GWI's agreement with us, charges us a per subscriber per month fee, and that's the largest of the GWI contract expenses. And the $360 a year from the subscribers pays that GWI expense.
And how does it, what's the cost for new people hooking up after the construction?
It's the time and materials less $500. So, and we set that amount because a typical install of a home along a road with a utility line with an aerial connection, Paige can correct me, but those have been coming in at around $500 or a little more. And in fact, we just had one today that came in at estimated $570, and the town picks up the first 500 of that. And the reason for that is the town owns every bit of equipment, including the device that's in the subscriber's home, all the cable and so forth. And we didn't feel comfortable asking the homeowner to pay for the town to own the equipment. So what the homeowner basically does is take on the labor cost of the installation. And there's nuances to that, but that's the basic premise of the current installation, is that it's about $570 for a basic install. For homes with buried conduit or homes that are 500, 600, 700, 1,000, 1,500 feet from the road, those installations are more expensive, and we charge accordingly.
How do you keep up with technology in the future? Do you put money aside, or does Paige figure it out? How do you deal with technological change? How do you stay on top of that?
Well, one of the reasons we picked fiber broadband is because we knew that had tremendous technological headroom. We currently we clock the signals at a gigabit here on the island. We use a 10 gigabit signal to the three-ring binder along Route 1. We could simply change the electronics at the central office or at the subscriber's location and deliver substantially more speed. We just saw an article this past week that fiber optics now have been pushed to 42 terabits, which is 42,000 times more speed than we're currently using. So there's no question that we picked the right technology. And there were other factors in the reason we picked fiber over systems like fixed wireless or the red zone system or other systems. We did a lot of homework in terms of long-term maintenance cost, the life of the infrastructure, which we had good evidence would be longer than the bond. And we're hopeful that that will prove to be true. But we're confident that we have put in place everything we need to have a generation or two continue to use this system. And we know there'll be new technologies, but this will deliver reasonable broadband. In fact, it's right now exceptional broadband to the citizens. And again, it's a matter of showing some leadership, not that this is the only way to do it or our decisions were the right ones for every town.
I'd reinforce one thing Roger just talked there, to be clear. In this whole system that we built, there's a single strand of fiber leading to each house. So if we have to upgrade, that massive effort of getting that fiber everywhere, that remains. It's just the little electronics on the end. So it's a very minor effort to make changes. So exactly like Roger said, we've got massive amounts of headroom to grow in with what we've got right now with the foreseeable demands. But if something comes down the road, we can upgrade quite easily.
And there's a lot of technology issues when you do an analysis like this, and they're not complicated, but you just have to give some thought. And for instance, one of the thoughts here is we have a lot of power outages, and we were concerned with certain technologies like fixed wireless that required quite a few powered devices out in the town to keep the system running. And our current implementation, what we did, has one electric connection at the central office, and then the only other electrified connections in the town are in the individual subscriber locations. So the rest of the system is completely unpowered, and that was a key point for us in terms of solving what happens in a power failure. We gave everybody a battery backup system for their electronics, and many people have generators, but we know that in a power failure the system won't go down, but some subscribers, if they don't have power, won't be able to get on. But we were tolerant of that risk. That's just one example of many questions we asked about various technologies.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering also about if you knew roughly like the percentage of residents, whether it's full-time year-round or not, that actually subscribe to the service. And then also, I don't know if this is a strange question, but do you think that the fact that Islesboro has a fairly healthy tax base due to summer residency has any impact on the island's ability to self-fund a project like this?
Okay, both good questions. What we would say is that our take rate on the system is in excess of 80%. And it could be higher than that, but that's our best guess based on what we think the number of people that are actually out here living. And it's a really hard number to get to, and we're very careful about asking. But we knew from before, when we started the project, that there were about 700 landlines installed on Islesboro. Fairpoint would never tell us the exact number, but Paige and I are both smart technologists, and we worked out how to find out. And we counted about 700 landlines, and we have 630 installed using the broadband now. So that's a very high take rate. The question on the tax base is actually interesting. I would say it's true that the fact that Islesboro has some expensive summer homes made this a little more doable from a standpoint of financing it, because the expensive properties do pay more for the upkeep of the infrastructure, if you will, than a $100,000 house of a full-time island family. But only one summer family complained about the system going in when it was being proposed. Only one said, I don't think we should do it. I don't want to see my taxes go up.
Wow.
Everyone else we heard from said, oh, thank God you're doing this. It means that I can work from home and stay longer. But it's definitely the case that our tax base helps spread the load of the $260,000 a year bond payment. And I think we have good anecdotal information on this. It's actually helped property values here, both in terms of purchasing and rentals. So it's a difficult question, and we were very sensitive about that.
Well, I'd say too, we went through a very lengthy journey. I mean, on the one hand, we were early on, some of the first in the state, so we had a lot of discovery to do to figure out what was legal, what would work with the businesses, and so on. So, and a lot of other businesses out there have gone through that now, so it's going to be easier to figure out now. But we went through a big journey of trying to find the right balance of, you know, what does it cost for people now? And as Roger said earlier, we figured out looking at the typical phone bill with the DSL, and then we told people, look, with your property taxes and paying for the property tax increase and paying for the fee to use the system and having a phone, which is another dialogue, but it's coming through GWI through our fiber. The combination of that, the majority of people were saving money. So that right there made a lot of the other taxpayers happy. Even though their taxes were going up, they saw at the end of the year, they were better off. And what I absolutely say is when we first did it, people were happy. There was almost no complaining. I mean, people were happy. But now with this virus thing going on, people are ecstatic. I mean, they are like, we know you did the right thing, and we're so happy for the timing that it was in and done.
Wow.
One thing I should mention is that the 5 years that have passed since we started this has brought online a lot of ancillary funding sources to help with planning. So it is, for us, because of the timing of when we started to do this, there were no grants available from the state. There were no federal grants available to us. That all of that was beyond our reach. Now there's many opportunities to look for help financing these systems. The other thing that's happened, and I think you've mentioned it earlier, is that frankly, the incumbent cable and telephone companies are much more willing to make deals now with towns to deliver reasonable commitments for broadband. And that just wasn't the case when we were doing this. That the cable companies frankly didn't treat us seriously. And now they're bidding for these jobs, and that's really good. So I think the financing part is much more doable now than it was. And plus, you know, it could be that the technologies have changed enough that it could be slightly less expensive. And you have the benefit, the way we did, of close distance to the 3-ring binder. We could not have done this had the 3-ring binder been 25 miles away in Augusta, or we could not have afforded the fiber optic link to get us from the island to the 3-ring binder. We were very fortunate to be able to have proximity to that on Route 1.
Roger, can you just explain what the 3-ring binder is so everyone knows?
Oh, I'm going to get this wrong. The 3-ring binder is a quasi government corporation that owns a substantial fiber backbone that runs to quite a few places in Maine, and leases the fiber capability, the fiber optic strands in its lines to any and all players. It's a completely open access network.
Dark fiber.
It's a dark fiber network, and they maintain it. It runs along Route 1. It's especially prevalent south of here, but it continues up Route 1. And I believe that the down east locales that are doing their own municipal fibers now, what's the name of that page? The group that's doing that.
Up in Machias up there.
Up in Machias, they are utilizing the 3-ring binder as their transport as well. So it is a wonderful thing. It came about because of a settlement between the state and Verizon at the time. That was our telephone company. And that helped fund, as I recall,
No, that's, you're mixing a couple things there.
Okay, good. I knew I was going to get it wrong, Paige. Go ahead.
What you're talking about there, that was the main schools and library networks, where a long time ago, the phone company got caught with a hand in the cookie jar, and their get out of jail free card was they were going to provide fiber to the schools and libraries. And that still exists today. That's still going on. But the 3-ring binder, that there's 3 different circles of fiber loops around the state. And what that provides is redundancy. So anybody connecting onto those rings, if one ring goes down, your traffic just goes along another ring to get back to Boston and New York and out to the world. So those 3 are there. And that was, I guess it used to be, I don't know if it's private or not, but the short of it is the 3-ring binder in the last year or 2 got bought out by a private party, which was rather surprising, because what it was doing was offering neutral dark fiber to anybody. As Roger said, any business individual, anybody could get it. And the issue was it was all transparent. So you didn't have to go into hush-hush proprietary meetings and try to figure out, can we get it at what cost, what terms? It was published. Here's what it costs if you want to travel this distance. It's dark fiber, you lease it, they maintain it, but you light it up yourself.
I had a question.
Now,
Hold on, let's go to Jordan first.
well, actually, Mike, I thought I saw your hand up for a while. Have you been trying to get something in edgewise?
Well, no, yeah, I did have a question for either Roger or Paige. And reading the town's site on your service, which is great. Somebody deserves a lot of credit for putting all that information out there for people. But I noticed that you had some private donors, seed money, startup money, relatively early in your process. How important was that in getting started? I assume it helped a lot.
That's a good question. When we started this, Paige and I, to get the money to do that census, to get the money to have a contractor, Tilson in Portland, draft the RFP documents and so forth, we did not want to look to the town to have to pay for that. So we went out and raised money, and ultimately the town split the cost. The select board allocated money from the town technology budget, and then we more than matched that with private donations. So it was incredibly important. Nowadays, there are grant sources for doing this sort of planning that towns can get the planning done and not have to make a big investment of taxpayer dollars or do what we did, which was going hand to hand. I will say we also called in every favor that we could during this process. And I'm going to say the total donations page were maybe in excess of $100,000 against the total cost of the project. I will also tell you that we have roughly $60 left in the account from the $3.8 million. So we did not go over budget in terms of constructing it.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I'd reiterate what Rob talked about is early on when we did it, it was critical. I think it was critical the way we did it, that we did that report up front. But again, that's because we were early. The state and the vendors, all the players, nobody had real ideas of how could this go. So we had to do a lot of that front work to figure it out. These days, it's going to be a lot easier because a lot of these different vendors have already gone through it. They know now, and the laws have changed. The PUC rules have changed, and people are familiar with it now. So it's a lot easier now. But it's still, I think, very important that you've got to go through that process to prove to your voter that, hey, we've taken a look, here's the options, and this is why this is the option that's for us. And, you know, as Roger said, I think the fiber is a rock solid solution that you can depend on for generations, literally generations, with minor upgrades. But if you're going down other paths, now you've got to start to say, well, you know, if we're doing the wireless, we got to look at replacing the equipment every 5 years, and everyone's not getting the same level of service because some are down behind a hill or behind trees or whatever. If you're going with the copper solution, or the coax, the cable companies type solution, the DOCSIS, you've got a lot of compromises to make down that path as well. So then it changes your conversation of what's your investment now and over time. So you definitely got to do that research up front to figure out what's the best solution for the long haul. And are you going for a short-term solution or a long-term solution?
One further question, just it's clear to me. When the process started in 2014, your incumbent had no fiber to the island?
No, that's not true. They had a handful of strands to the island that ran from their underwater cable along some of the town rights of way to their central office, as well as other locations where they had contracts to deliver communications, like this. There's a cell phone tower in Islesboro, and the schools, and the school and the library. So the incumbent did have fiber optics out here, but as Paige mentioned, it was a time when, honestly, Paige and I went years without a single person off the island saying they wanted us to succeed at doing this. That everybody we met as our journey in the state had a mindset that we were certainly going to fail doing this. And they wanted us to fail. So
in the incumbent community, I would say.
In the incumbent community especially, but also frankly in the PUC and process and so forth that we had to go through. But all of that has changed now. The state has really woken up about the importance of good internet access. And frankly, we had great support from Senator King's office. And we really needed that. We also had good support from our state legislatures people when we needed it. We called in those favors.
Okay. Sorry, George, hold on. Let's go to Jordan.
All right. Well, thanks. I see a couple of similarities between our communities and the fact that it was very difficult for either of our communities to get the incumbent providers to actually build out to the places that were necessary, and even the places that want to have it. Can you speak to, and I know this is purely an opinion thing, but how much of having this type of infrastructure under the town's control, can you speak to how much of an asset that is, both financially, but also as a community type of infrastructure, being able to control that within the town, essentially being owned by the citizens of the town? I just was curious to hear your thoughts about that, because to me, that seems like that's the most attractive thing, that in essence, we're all owners and shareholders of this common asset, which after the bond is paid off, I could see it being a tremendous financial asset as well as what it provides us.
You know, in all these briefings that we do, you're the first person that's ever asked that question. And the answer is, oh yeah. I won't go into which of the incumbents made this proposal to us, but one of the incumbent proposals was basically write us a $2 or $3 million check and we'll see what we can do.
It was the same cost.
And that caused great concern in the town. And we heard loud and clear from the voters that if the town was going to borrow money, the town had to own something, had to own an asset, this infrastructure asset. And that colored and drove our thinking quite dramatically in terms of the way we approach this. that if the town was going to borrow that kind of money, we had to own it. Now, ultimately, we decided to build the whole infrastructure, and it cost more than that $2.5 or $3 million check. But we own a substantial financial asset, and it's a source of pride on the island that we do. It's not all that different from the town saying, we're going to build a sewage treatment plant, or we're going to build a waterworks, or is something like that. It's very, very similar. And frankly, we were informed quite a bit by what's going on in other parts of the country and the history of rural electrification and municipal utilities. We were quite informed by the structures that they used, and generally they followed the path that they trod the path that we followed, which is the town should own the infrastructure. It's a financial asset for the town. And then we have ultimately control. The select board approves the contract with the ISP, in our case, GWI. But that contract will have to be renewed in a few years. And the select board sets the subscriber fees. So we are in control of the cost, the ultimate cost to the town's residents. You're right. And very few people ask that question, if any.
I definitely would definitely say, for me personally, that is probably the most important reason. And that's what motivated me early on to pour my soul into making this happen. And there were a couple of different reasons, two primary drivers. One was just after, at that point, over a decade of supporting people out here and just seeing how much they suffer in being able to do their work or education or anything online. It was causing real pain and really restricting people's lives, their ability to control their own destiny. It was, this corporation from away that really didn't care about investing in the community. They were controlling the impact on people's lives. And that just didn't work for me, especially knowing that problem is just going to get bigger. The need for people to be able to use the internet in an unfettered manner is just going to grow. And that came to fruition. And I'm very happy that we have the control of that, because as Roger said, where the town contracts GWI, we now can tell GWI, here's the performance standards that we want this network to run to. That's all in the contract. If they don't meet those standards, we fire them and we get someone else. But with the incumbents, you can't do anything. I mean, you can go to the PUC, you can try what you want. Nothing's gonna change. I mean, there's a long history, decades history that will prove that. You're at their mercy. So to me, that was unacceptable. And then the other part, the tinfoil hat part, is I was very concerned about government intrusion into our privacy of our lives and corporate intrusion into monetizing our lives. And you have no control over that with other ISPs when they own the network. And that's something that I've been concerned about for a long time. And I'm afraid it's going to become more to the forefront, and people are going to be more concerned about that soon with everything that's going on. I mean, you probably just saw the recent Senate vote of they want to allow the ISPs or they want to allow the government to look at our web browsing history without warrants, without us knowing about it. I mean, these guys are just reaching into our lives. And if you own the network, you now can draw a line, whether it's monetization or whether it's privacy, or if anything happens to the internet, you can take control of your own network and now run your own private network and still let your people function. I mean, these are extremely critical issues that, how do you put a price tag on them?
I would say, and I come from a commercial background, and it's completely understandable to me that the incumbent companies are public companies. They have shareholders. They have to have investment hurdles. And I completely understand why they would say a town like Islesboro or Lincolnville is just too small, too rural to make a business case. I totally understand that. And we frankly didn't do a lot of complaining about the incumbents. That was just a fact of life when we were doing this. And I think it's important to remember that they are commercial entities. It's a very interesting fact about this privacy issue. One of the things that popped up on Facebook early on was here on the island was, well, why don't we use the broadband system to figure out who's where? And my response was, no way are we looking at traffic on our network. That is a tremendous intrusion into the privacy of our residents. And there was some pushback, like, I can't believe you're being so foolish. It's an easy way to get this done. But no way are we don't look at traffic. We know who has a connection, but we don't know if they're there. We don't know what websites they're looking at. We know nothing about what they're doing with the system. And that's an operating principle that's deep in the way we set this up for people out here following along on Paige's lead about the importance of privacy and control.
I'd reinforce one thing too. I agree with what Roger said. I totally understand that the ISPs, the incumbent type, they would look at this and say, there's not a business case for them to build it. And that was that's an important issue, I think, to really think through, because that now affects the business model you look at, the payback period and so on. Because part of their problem is they need a payback period more like in 7 years, whereas we could do it in 20 years with a bond. That's part of what brought our costs way down and made it palatable for people. And also part of the whole thing you're going to have to decide in those decisions is the take rate. And, we came to a certain point where we were pretty clear a whole lot of people were going to join on to this. But if you step into this as a pure commercial enterprise, that's a huge part of the story. Where's the take rate? Who guarantees you can hit that take rate and be successful? And, if you own it, that take rate is less of a concern. But you've got to answer that question. How many people are going to sign on? And these days, I think you're going to count on a lot more, because before, people say, well, I have DSL. I don't really care. It's good enough for me. But these days, people are clear. They need real broadband. So those issues you've got to think through.
And
Okay.
no one believed us when we said we thought we'd get to 80%, because a typical commercial take rate for high-speed internet is 25%.
David, then George.
You guys are really inspiring. It's amazing what you've done. But as I listen to the two of you, I'm so impressed by the two of you. I'm wondering where we get the same abilities to get this off the ground. Do you have any suggestions for consultants and resources? We started looking at some grants, but any ideas on who we could get to have some of the skills that both of you have?
It's interesting. We worked with a guy. We met a guy in the process of doing our construction that is now out on his own, a Maine resident that is helping communities. I am happy to send his name and contact information to David. You can make your own choice. He's very knowledgeable. He's been down the road of helping many towns in Maine plan out and look at their alternatives. He's a very interesting guy, and he's made a business out of helping towns. I know when I've recommended him that he's really helped these towns at least get their ducks in a row in terms of talking to the incumbents, because it can be quite intimidating, frankly. And I'll send his contact information to David, and then I'll copy him as well on that email so that he knows I made the recommendation.
I mean, me personally, I'd say you're going to want to check around a bit. You're going to definitely see difference of views, and definitely, me personally, I think as you're sensing, you'll start to feel it when you start to talk to different groups who has, if you want to call it the incumbent mentality, which to me isn't very innovative. Others are much more aggressive. There's a whole spectrum out there, and that's what you really want to sense when you're talking to people, is who's innovative and willing to look at changing and new ways of doing things. One thing that worked for us with that particular issue was the way we went through the discovery process. Early on, we ended up really working with GWI, and they were highly innovative and very, very open in sharing with the information. So that helped us from our side and their side find a middle point that was going to work for us. Some of the other incumbents, information is not shared. and there's other providers like GWI, like Pioneer. They're very good as well with respect to implementing these solutions. They've done a lot of their own systems up in the state. Some hybrid systems where it's coax going out to the house, but it's fiber feeding it. So they've got good experience and can help guide you on the way as well.
Yeah, I think we would both recommend, if you haven't spoken to GWI, to get in touch with them. We can make that contact for you. They tend to have a bigger presence in southern Maine, but they have been nothing but perfect for us as a partner in getting this done. And Pioneer is also a great example of a vendor who takes a very innovative approach. The person I'm going to send to David doesn't work for any particular vendor, so he's much more of an independent, and you can make your own call as to how you want to go. But the people at GWI would be more than happy, I'm sure, to talk to you about what your options are. You shouldn't be shy about that.
Okay, great. George and then Gina.
Yeah, sorry, I want to clarify my earlier question. When you began your process, in terms of the residential homes being serviced on the island, what percentage of those already had fiber?
None.
Zero.
Zero. So there wasn't any incumbent fiber when you began this.
There was fiber infrastructure on the island, but it wasn't available to anybody except commercial users, if you will.
So that there wasn't any existing availability of fiber on the island to enable, and this sort of enabled you to be able to know that any fiber that was going to be taken would be your fiber when you built this.
Yes, yes. And, is it possible that in 2015, if I had called Fairpoint and said, I want you to put a fiber optic connection to my home, and I'm willing to pay any amount to have that done and pay any amount on a monthly basis, sure, I could have probably had that. But the average person on the island could never have afforded that kind of a solution.
Those any amounts would have been astronomical.
They would have been astronomical. And even now, if you go into Portland and say, I want a gigabit service to my home, you'd be paying $1,000 a month.
I mean, I just want to say that I'm absolutely astounded that every person who has this gets a gigabit service. I've got 20 megabits up and down with Lincolnville Telephone. That's 50 times slower than what you have, and I'm paying triple the amount.
And Josh, I'm paying more than you, and I have not even a tenth of what you have, my friend. So
let me say that there's
a good wake up call for everybody.
Let me point out that there are some really good financial reasons why putting everybody at the same service level was a good decision. We only have to stock one kind of electronics in our storeroom. When Paige goes out, he doesn't have to worry what's their service level. We don't have any back office overhead managing whether this person has 20 megabits or 100 megabits or a gigabit. Everybody has the same service, and it really helps lower the operating cost.
No shut off.
And, it's just a fact. And another thing we decided, and this came up in the contract negotiations with GWI, that when we first looked at their proposal, they were going to charge us a lot of money to bill our subscribers every month. And that would have raised the cost to every subscriber. And we said, well, what if we send the bills? And you don't have to worry about bad credit. You're taking, the town of Islesboro backs up the payments to you, and we'll take the risk that the subscriber doesn't pay. And that lowered the cost by the yearly cost by some 25%. So we made quite a few decisions focused on how to minimize the yearly operating expense and ultimately the cost of subscribers.
One thing another way of putting that is the tiered pricing that these vendors do are artificial constructs to try to maximize profits, to shorten their period of return on their investment. So that's again part of the argument of you own it, it's wide open, everybody gets equal access.
And
Gina,
we heard quite loud and clearly at town info meetings, we don't want haves and have-nots. We don't want the big summer homes to have great internet and my kid can't have it. We heard that dozens and dozens of times from the voters.
Early on, some of the negative, there wasn't really a lot of negative, but some of the people who were not happy and grumpy about it, once we settled on saying everybody gets the same for the same price, they said, hey, at least it's fair for everybody, and they got happy.
That's great. Okay, Gina, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question, but I find this intriguing and very interesting and very informative, and thank you.
Well, Gino, thank you for that. I will say that neither Paige nor myself, we're not on a crusade. We don't go out in the state promoting municipal broadband, but we're happy to help anybody who's thinking about this and navigating the trail to try to get something done for their town. We're happy to do these kind of things. We're not on any personal crusade,
Yeah, that's
but
fair.
thank you.
I'd say the closest to a crusade I'm on with it is I strongly believe in open and unfettered internet is critical to maintaining a representative democracy. So in that sense, I am on a crusade. Whatever you implement, you want to have some control of it and you want it open and free.
Amen.
Yeah, and that spoke to directly to the hearts of many voters out here, as I'm sure that you have similar voters in Lincolnville. They're concerned about their property tax, but they're also concerned about their personal freedoms.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, well,
Roger, I had one last question, Josh. Roger and Paige, were there any other bidders to being your ISP other than GWI?
I'd say-
No, but GWI actually responded in the first RFP with their proposal. Had we gone without that proposal to a similar answer, we would have gone out for a bid of ISPs. So GWI had a lock on the being the initial ISP because of the way they responded to the original RFP or RFI. But had that not happened that way, we would have gone out to bid. And there are many, I shouldn't say many, but there are a lot of good ISPs in Maine that that compete with GWI. And that certainly would have bid on the job. And we heard from them after people started knowing that we were serious. We heard from quite a few people like, why didn't you pick me? Did this go out for bid? And we explained that no, they were one of the first responders to our original request for proposals. That's just, but they have a 5-year contract with the town. And in a couple of years, we'll be renegotiating that contract and maybe put it out to bid. I don't know.
And one thing that's key with that, I think Roger's exactly right. We put out an RFI asking people, saying, look, we understand this is our problem and we're going to have to put money in to solve this problem. What kind of solution would you offer in that scenario? And GWI is the only one that's saying, hey, look, we can figure out the ownership and we're flexible. So that's where we pursued it. And the other key point at that point in time, this wasn't a model known in the state. So, other vendors didn't really know how to respond to that. So that's why I don't think there were a lot of other responses. But since then, in my view, the one that's done the most along these lines is Pioneer, and Axiom has done some as well. But there's other vendors out there, like Roger said, now that they've all looked at this, there's much more interest in exploring relationships. So I think that's part of the story is you got to go to these incumbents, go to anybody that's willing to talk and sense the philosophy that you're hearing from them and how they're going to approach this.
So what piece of the infrastructure does GWI own? Is it just the cable out to the island?
They don't own anything.
Does Islesboro own that cable under the water to Route 1?
We leased that cable from CMP.
We
The
got
CMP owns the fiber going under?
CMP owns the undersea cable that comes to the island, and we were able, well, it wasn't an easy negotiation, but we were able to negotiate a lease for 6 strands of that undersea cable. And that's how we get back to Route 1. But GWI doesn't own any of the infrastructure on the island.
Was it ever considered that Islesboro actually act as the ISP?
For about a minute and a half, and Paige and I both knew that that was nothing but a heartache. There was no way the town wanted to have employees or, you know, the responsibility for actually connecting to the internet. This is a skilled job, and you know, the people who sit in the GWI operations room and make sure that the network is connected to the great world internet and the World Wide Web, and that it's operating correctly, and looking for faults and managing all those bits and managing the software updates and everything. That's a skill that towns just don't have. I know that there are towns in Massachusetts, for instance, that do operate their own internet. But for Islesboro, it was just never on the table.
I think probably for much of Maine, I don't think that's going to make sense for a while. I mean, some of the new stuff that came out since we did ours, I don't remember the name, but the community municipal networks where different communities can bond together. That's what's going on up in Machias. So a couple communities can work together, and what that helps then is you can keep expanding out, like from the 3-ring binder, because you're at the 3-ring binder. Community 1 connects on, community 2 behind them connects on through community 1, and so on. And some of those can make regional municipal businesses of some form. I'm not up on it. I didn't really pay attention. Once we got connected, I was like, okay, I'm good with that problem. But there are some solutions to consider that way. But I don't see that really working well for a lot of people in Maine for a while.
So sort of a power in numbers, that if you have 2 or 3 even towns that border each other, that they all get together and collectively go to somebody to say, will you be my ISP, and you know, will you be my vendor to network our area?
Right. The Down East people have formed a regional utility district.
That's it,
as
right?
A way of a structure for doing this. And then they promoted to the towns, their neighboring towns, that they should join forces to build out the system and then sell and lease the capability of the system as an open network. We didn't think that was the right answer for Islesboro, but we could have gone that way, but we just didn't think that was the right answer to have multiple vendors out here using our fiber. It just seemed too complicated for a little town.
And the money wasn't there.
Good point. Good point.
So Lincolnville, it seems, is a unique community in the sense that Lincolnville Telephone Company has 41.5 miles of fiber in our town already.
Mm-hmm.
And they've approached us and said, if the town doesn't act at all, we will put in the additional 25 miles of fiber and cover basically every street in your town. But if the town wants to help, put in some money where they wouldn't own any infrastructure, we could speed it up to 2 years. And so the, you know, it's like with all this infrastructure that's already in place, does it make sense for us as a community to put up all of this fiber next to their fiber? Would it pay off in the end? I think that's what I'm grappling with personally.
Well, I think that's a deep question you're going to have to noodle. It was the case for our voters that owning an asset was very important, and we weren't going to write a corporate welfare check. So, but the fact that they have an infrastructure and a capability seems to me to give them a leg up on providing a low-cost solution for you. It's just that you have to work out, you know, what does the town get for its financial investment? It's got to get more than a promise.
Exactly. To me, that's that is the tough thing to noodle to a finish is in the long term, what do you get? Because maybe everything's beautiful right now. Network comes in, but 5 years down the road when we got to upgrade and they're saying, nah, we're good. Or down the road, they just want to raise rates and you're saying, well, wait, that's expensive, but what are you going to do? So trying to find out a long-term commitment that everyone lives by, that's going to be tough when dealing with them. So that is a very hard question to answer. And honestly,
one of the things,
lucky we didn't have to answer that because there was no one else to compete in that sort of sense of competition.
one of the other structures that we didn't utilize but we talked about is for the town to, in some sense, instead of paying for the construction, to guarantee the take rate. In other words, that the town would ensure that a given number of subscribers would show up and want the service, and therefore take the risk of the construction cost away from the provider. And that is something that is done by municipalities where you're just basically saying, well, we'll guarantee you'll get 400 new customers, and if you don't, we'll make up the difference, kind of thing. It's an unusual structure, but it's not rare.
One thing to keep in mind when you're trying to answer that question, that was one important piece for us as we built our plans and how we're going to go, was we made it clear to people they could sign on and be part of the construction budget. So in a sense, it wouldn't cost them anything. It would all be part of the bond and the taxes and all that, but they were having to shell out money up front. And that's a huge part of the issue in the take rate is, what do I got to pay? And if one thing we were wrestling with, because we couldn't answer at that point in time, is like, okay, we're going to run fiber all the way around to the curb. It's out there, but now you got to get from the curb to your house. Who's paying for that? Is the homeowner paying for that? And how much is it going to cost? And that is a huge part of the equation of, like Roger mentioned early on, that was some of the expense, but also the real pain of figuring out the detail that changes from house to house. So for us, it really radically simplified things to say, anybody who signs up early on, they're part of the construction cost. At a certain point in time, we cut that date off, or at a certain date, we cut that off. And then after that, they have to pay for part of the install. So that was part of the game that we had to go through to figure out this take rate question and ownership and all of that.
Great. Any other questions before we let them go? All right, great. Well, Paige and Roger, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
David, I'll send you an email with this additional information. One of the select board members asked about the census, and I can send that report. I believe I can track that down and send it to you. And I'll send you the name of this independent consultant. And if he can help, great. If he can't, great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank
Big
you.
journey.
Thank you guys anytime.
All right.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you, Roger. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Well, I'm blown away at what they told us. I just want to say the biggest thing that strikes me is, so they spent $3.8 million to run 46 miles of fiber, and
But also on an island.
And on an island. And Lincolnville Telephone has run 41.5 miles of fiber. Now, granted, they said they still need to run 25 miles of fiber, but I just thought, without doing any research on it, that we would have substantially, in order of magnitudes, more miles of fiber to run, and it, yeah. So I was encouraged to hear that.
Yeah, this definitely reaffirmed a lot of what I have seen and heard and done research on. And we're also quite lucky in Maine that we don't have to clear some of the hurdles that communities in other states have to deal with, namely companies like Comcast pouring millions of dollars into actually fighting municipalities creating their own internet infrastructure. So in that way, in Maine, we're very fortunate that we actually don't have enough of a footprint to call that kind of attention here, which gives us an advantage in creating something like this. And these types of infrastructures, as far as I've read, have just been huge boons to communities. And you talk about property value and other kind of ancillary benefits that come with this. I mean, they're almost endless. And I feel like not to look at internet as a utility, a necessary public utility at this point, is just really denying the reality of the world today. So everything I heard really just backed up what I thought was going on, and they're fantastic, really.
I think they're a very interesting group. I guess the central question is, if you already have substantial fiber to the home, are you going to get the kind of almost entire buy-in to overbuild that with a new system? Otherwise, you have two systems, a municipal system and a competing system, which certainly will drive down cost. And the other thing I think that's important to keep in mind is that not only is there a bond issue here, but there's at least $200,000 of seed money that they put up in terms of donations and, I guess, from the funds of their community. And I think you want to balance that against, the $7,500 that we were talking about the last time we met, or in terms of money to the cable company. Obviously, the big difference is owning the system. And there obviously are huge benefits to that. I think they're pretty naive to think that by owning the system, they're going to be able to overrun a federal statute in terms of the ability for the federal government to listen to what you're doing. I mean, that's the real issue, is really a federal issue, not something that individual ownership is going to want to do, because any one of the large cable companies hates this as much as anyone else does. So I think that's a little naive. But in terms of the fundamental issue here, I think it really is, do you buy the system? And again, what we've had on the one hand was a proposal from the people we loathe, the people everyone on this phone loathes, to have the system to everybody in 4 years, and a process that took them 4 years to get their system up and running. I think that's the fundamental decision here is how much do you loathe the incumbent, and how much the future benefits are for the community. Certainly, you're going to be building an asset of great value. Is it worth the cost if the fundamental goal is to get 100% coverage as quickly as possible? I think that's sort of the question.
What does broadband cost per year? I don't have broadband, so I don't know.
Well, I'll just say, so looking at their flyer, for a new subscriber, I have a grandfathered plan, so it doesn't even matter.
69 and 89 a month.
Yeah, so $69.95 per month for 50 down and 10 up, and then $89 a month for 100 down and 20 up. And it's just like it's comical when you look at that compared to what they just told us. I have a friend in Minneapolis. I think he had 250 megabits a second, and it was $40 a month. I mean, it's just the amount that we're being charged is. It feels criminal.
The other question is, and because obviously there are a lot of complaints against the local provider, is are we now in a situation in which we have an alternative, and we go back to them and say, listen, we have an alternative, let's cut a deal. And what I was thinking, Jordan's very powerful recitation of the difficulties and the costs here and the shitty service, make a list of all the things you hate and use that as the beginning of a discussion with the company in terms of going forward to see if they're going to move. I mean, I think that if we act as a community, we have leverage much more than going at this as a bunch of individuals. We're getting screwed. I mean, it just seems to me that that's a possibility if you want to have a discussion on a community basis rather than an individual negotiation on a price list they're not going to negotiate from.
Sure, and having the survey, a well-done survey that gets to the heart of that question, approaching them and saying, here's 1,000 responses from our community. This is what they think. If you want us to continue with you, how will you make it better?
Yeah, and I think the survey becomes essential, and being able to use theirs will be a great advantage to us. I think that's probably what you build on. I think, And then.
Well, and oh, sorry.
What I came away with tonight is, we should really pursue the option so we understand it. We should have a consultant helping us. We should have the conversations with GWI and Pioneer. We should really understand all of that. And then once we do, we'll be in a position to get feedback from the public and also then to come up with a strategy. Right now, we're so early on in our understanding of this thing that I think we need to not get ahead of ourselves.
In terms of hiring a consultant, obviously we don't have a budget for this committee. So I'm assuming we would make a request to the select board. I don't know how that would work.
So
Well, I thought that we would.
I did talk to Island Institute, okay?
Okay, yep.
And what they do have money. They have plenty of money. They have a cycle right now that you have to apply by July. It's one pool of money, July 1st. And then they have a different donor putting up money behind that.
Okay.
And they're very eager to hear from us. Their
Really?
grant sizes are $5,000 to $15,000, and it's a planning grant. The one thing they said was if you put up some donations or some town money, even a small amount, it gives you more credibility. And I talked to, whoops.
This is my first time doing this.
Okay, great. Anyway, so I was talking to the lady whose name is on this somewhere. So she said if we had some donations or ability to contribute some of our own monies, it would make us much higher up the likelihood of getting the grant. But she very much wants to work with us. Her name
Yeah,
is
they're talking about a
Kendra.
match, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't so much a match. She wasn't looking for a match. She just says the more you put in and the more seriousness you show, the more interest we have in you.
Yeah.
She didn't require a one-to-one match, which was nice.
So even though we have substantial infrastructure in Lincolnville, she still thought that we could be a good fit.
She encouraged us to apply. I didn't get into a lot more details. I said, is there money? She knew who we were. She really wanted to work with us. And I said I would, pass on the information. I didn't ask her details about her profile.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
But she was very enthusiastic.
Well, I would think, wouldn't there be a kind of like a process towards working towards something like having a consultant? I would think that we would first want to have the town vote on pursuing it, wouldn't we? Like we would see the interest first, do a survey, and then if the survey showed that there was enough interest in the town, wouldn't we then put a vote towards the town saying to establish an exploratory committee with a budget of X amount of dollars and move forward that way? Because I don't think that that's really in the purview of what we're chartered to do.
To have an effective survey, we're going to have real information. We can't just ask people, do you like this? Do you like that? We're going to have to provide some
That's what
details.
you do.
Well,
That's what we're here to do, is to find out, hey, do you have interest in finding out more about this? Because in an unfunded committee, our hands are tied. So we're really just here to find out a basic level of information to present to the voters. And then if the voters are interested, I would think that they would vote upon establishing a committee that has a certain amount of financial backing so that they can move forward and find out the next level of information to move forward.
Well, just to clarify, to present information to the select board and then the select board.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And you'll probably have multiple surveys or communications, not just one.
Bless you, David.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to think, where do we go from here?
Well, do we look to get a copy of their census and begin to circulate that amongst the committee and use that as the basis to try to begin to have some kind of a document to send around? Is that productive?
I think so, for sure. Definitely. As a basic rough template. I mean, it's not like we have to use it, but I mean, that's an excellent example. It's been used, and I think it can only do good.
Yeah, Mike.
Well, there are a number of surveys out there already, which have been used and still are online, so they still have life. And we could take a look at a few of those. How well they worked, I don't know. We might want to look in, but we can at least look at the questions and see if we think that they're germane or not. Just a Google search of municipal broadband surveys brings up, half a dozen.
Could you circulate them, Mike?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've got some bookmarked. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Also, one other thing I thought, I kind of feel as if I ought to get out there is also there's their websites which show the downsides, if not evils, of municipal broadband for a community. And I just sent out some which just praise municipal broadband. And I thought maybe we should balance that a little bit because I think there are probably pros and cons. So I'll send that as well.
Great. Okay, well, yeah, so we will read those. We'll hopefully receive this access to this Dropbox that Oswald has and really kind of pour over what they have. Are there other people we'd like to hear from at our next meeting? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, well, what about seeing if Aaron Herbig, current rep, former rep.
Yeah.
Well, where exactly, current manager of Belfast, would be willing to speak because she was very big in Augusta in trying to get broadband available to rural Waldo County.
Yeah.
And she has written some legislation and sponsored some legislation. So I would think she'd be pretty helpful.
I think that's a great idea.
I don't know. Like I said, I really don't know what her which hat she wears now as city manager and Waldo rep. So I don't know to what extent we'd be her constituents anymore, But I'm sure she'd be willing to talk with us.
Do other members of the committee think that's
I do.
someone you want to hear from?
Yes.
Nothing wrong with knowledge.
Right.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's see. Anything else we want to cover at the next meeting? Want to make sure we are moving
Yeah, I just want to bring something up. Yeah, on looking back on our charge, we've got a deadline, and I don't know, with what's going on, if it's still active or not, of I think June 15th or something, to get back to the select board with a preliminary report or something, right? And I don't know if it's worth getting in touch with the select board and asking, does that date still, does that still apply? And anyway, even if it doesn't, I think we should start thinking about what our first communication with the select board is going to look like. What options we're considering, et cetera, what we're doing.
I think that's a great idea. If I'd be more interested than bringing other speakers in right now to kind of have our next meeting where we brainstorm more and then get some feedback, Josh or whoever can report out to the selectmen, because it doesn't really help if we start going down the wrong path, the one that they don't want us to go down. So it'd be great to get some looped in information from them before we go too much further.
So maybe the next meeting is the one in which we begin to conceptualize what we're going to tell our superiors here in terms of our report by mid-June.
I think that's a great idea. Let's
sort of argues for next week, doesn't it?
Also, Roger mentioned something about a company called Axiom, and maybe we would want to talk with them. I think that's how he pronounced it. My spelling. Yeah.
Okay.
So just a thought.
Okay. Yeah. Let's at a future meeting. Let's.
And I don't know if we want our questionnaire before to go to the selectmen, or what's the timing on our questionnaire?
Mm-hmm. I think that at the next meeting we can talk about that, and if we feel far enough along to share, or if we have consensus at our next meeting of a basic outline of a questionnaire that we think is ready to share with the select board. But I think you're right that let's not have any speakers at our next meeting and just talk about where we are.
Great.
Yeah, 'cause that was a lot of information.
Yeah, a lot to digest.
Great information.
Yes, very.
Okay, so I'm pulling up my calendar. And how do we all feel about 2 weeks from now? That would be June 11th. Thursday, June 11th.
I believe that's okay with me.
Sure.
Okay, good with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right, let's see. I think we covered action items. Any non-agenda items remaining?
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Josh. I don't know about this meeting, but last meeting we had a couple of what do you call them, attendees? People who were chatting in, as it were.
Mhm.
And we didn't really have a good way to fit them in, so they felt included and were getting whatever they needed to get out of this. I'm wondering if, at least for our next meeting, because it is a public meeting, we ought to, in the agenda, schedule a little citizens forum time at the beginning and or after.
Absolutely, I think that's a great idea.
So it's just a bit more, we know when to take the questions, as it were.
Right, yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Think the beginning of the meeting makes sense to
Okay.
have it there. So I'll be sure to have that at our next
Where do
meeting.
we see their comments? I know last time some people were seeing comments, but I wasn't. Where do we see those?
On the
Should be a
bottom of your
chat
screen, there's a
function.
chat and a Q&A.
Okay,
Yeah, there's open, answer, and dismiss questions.
Q&A chat. Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Okay, great. Anything else? All right, if not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
Okay, motion and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, let's just do a hand vote. All those in favor of adjourning?
Okay. There we
All
go.
right,
Well
all
done.
right, that passed. All right. Night, everyone. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, take care.